The way I see it is Donald Trump reached out to negotiate and they don't want to negotiate. That makes sense to me because the two times they've sat down to negotiate, Trump just bombed them anyways. And so I think at this point, they think they got an untrustworthy partner and they got to make this thing very costly. And we're kind of down to, because Donald Trump has said absolute surrender. And I think Iran wants to make this as expensive as possible and to have allies in the region very upset with us for lack of actually offering them security and messing up their oil business, that it gets to the point that we have to just get out and then the regime survives. So we're basically kind of at, there's only one, it's seemingly, I was hoping Donald Trump was going to take the off-ramp, say we killed Khamenei, it's a regime change. He didn't take that off-ramp. And so the way it looks like now is we're playing for keeps and we're playing to the finish. Now,
well, can I just add
yes.
on that point really quick there on that off-ramp? I think Netanyahu blew up that off-ramp. I think that Netanyahu knew that was the off-ramp that Donald Trump wanted to take. And so Donald Trump said this, that they killed all the people that they wanted to take over Iran were killed in Israeli strikes in the first couple waves of the bombing. And I think what Trump said was they killed the people we wanted. They killed the second wave of people they wanted. They probably killed the third wave of people we wanted. And pretty soon we're not going to know anybody. And so it's very possible that Netanyahu saw that possibility, but that's not what Israel wants, because that leaves a strong, united country of 90 million proud Muslims that are probably going to be, somewhat coalesced and want to be more hardline nationally and maybe support their groups in the Middle East. So he wants to make sure this is a long, drawn-out conflict that really weakens and potentially fractures Persia, right? That's his goal. And so he made sure that couldn't happen by the United States not being able to say, hey, if you put this guy in charge, we're all good here.
Now, is it, before we get back to logistics, is it true that Netanyahu also thwarted the earlier negotiations? Because there was at least, the problem with scrolling Twitter is it takes quite a bit of effort to separate fact from fiction, and then I just absorb a lot of information, and I got to go out and clarify it. But one of the things I was seeing was Netanyahu reaching out to Trump and being like, is it true that you've reached out to the Iranians directly? And then Trump being like, no, I would never do that. You're the boss here. We would never go behind your backs and try and talk to them. Was there an earlier actual honest negotiation effort, not Witkoff and Kushner, but Trump directly trying to reach out to the Iranians that Netanyahu found out about and, put his foot on?
I don't know if it was good faith. I think probably Trump tried to send a message to Tehran that was along the lines of, if you want to surrender, we will accept it. That's what he thought was going to happen. But I don't think he put out a sincere effort. But yeah, according to Axios, Netanyahu did reach out for a direct conversation with Donald Trump to make sure that he wasn't engaged in talks with the Iranians. So it goes to show how anxious Israel is about this being a short conflict.
Okay, and now it seems like, from what I gather of kind of the logistics of this thing, is that Iran's got a lot of really cheap stuff, or relatively cheaper to what we spend on missile defenses and Patriot missiles. And so they've kind of been lobbing the cheap shit to eat away at our very expensive stuff. And now it's kind of a question of how much of a stockpile do they still have that they can do severe damage, and what's the U.S. ability to basically take out those stockpiles. So what's your takeaway at the moment? Do they have a ton of stuff that they haven't used? Is the Americans and Israelis doing a good job of taking out stockpiles? Like, if you're trying to look at what the next 3 weeks look like, is Iran just pumping out these drones and pumping out their missiles and they're good to go for, another month and they're going to bleed us dry? Or is the U.S. doing a good job of disarming them?
I don't think the U.S. is doing a good job of disarming them. It seems that Iran has more advanced missile capabilities, both on the launcher end and the actual munition itself, than was anticipated. They're firing what people are calling a cluster munition, which I'm not sure if that's actually what it is. I think it's a multiple independent reentry vehicle where it's one very large rocket that separates into like one or two dozen smaller missiles that then are able to hit a target in a large area, where a cluster munition is more of an anti-personnel, like drop small grenades over a large area, something like that. So those are very hard to hit, obviously, because you don't know exactly how many warheads you're going to have coming out, where the targets are going to be. So that seems to be more advanced than planned. I saw videos, and there's been these videos published and confirmed that Iran is firing missiles essentially out of the flat ground, that they have tunnel networks underground, and they have launchers that just flat with the surface, missiles, dust flying out of the air. I mean, they have some advanced capabilities. And while the US is estimating Iran's missile stockpile, they were wrong about it during the 12-day war in June. They thought Iran was going to run out of missiles far before they did. I really don't have any advanced insights. Some people say that the pace of Iranian missile strikes is slowing down, but that could be due to targeting information. Even if Iran has a lot of missiles, they may not know exactly where to program into targets, particularly targets that are going to be somewhat vulnerable and not well defended. Yeah, I'm sure they know where Israeli, and U.S. military bases are, but that's also where the most advanced radars and missile defense systems are going to be positioned to defend. Other areas like downtown Abu Dhabi or in Bahrain, hotel rooms where there's U.S. soldiers or personnel may be easier to hit, but obviously getting that targeting information is a lot harder to come by. But they have been able to. This was reported in the Washington Post. I think it was in Bahrain or maybe Kuwait. There were two American defense officials who were injured in a hotel room by an Iranian drone strike. And so I don't think the Iranians are just randomly striking hotels. I think they're doing fairly targeted strikes on what they believe are locations of U.S. defense personnel. So it's really hard to say, Robbie. I do think if you look at the number of American radar systems that have been hit in the Middle East, I think by my count, it's about 8, although it's really hard to confirm. There's all this open source intelligence of people analyzing satellite information, and a lot of good work has been done there. But now with AI ability to generate fates, it's sometimes hard to tell. But multiple THAAD missile defense radars have been hit. Early warning detection systems in Kuwait and Qatar, which are key, have been hit. And so maybe Iran is really slowing the rate that they're firing their missiles right now, knowing that when they fire them now, the US and Israel are going to have like a 50% chance or so of shooting down the missiles. Whereas if they're able to punch a few more holes in these radar systems, once they're able to identify where they are and when it's going to be a vulnerable time to attack, then they're going to have success rates that are like 80 or 90%. So they're just kind of biding their time and doing this slowly. And also there's the factor of right now, it seems that the US ships are hanging out pretty far away from Iran. But if Trump executes his plan to escort, cargo tankers through the Middle East carrying oil and things like that through the Strait of Hormuz, then Iran maybe has a lot of missile capabilities that they haven't even used yet. They're short-range anti-ship missiles. So who knows what the Iranians have, I guess is the point.
All right. Well, I think time is on Iran's side, but I'm going to ADD. I want to shelve that for 1 second and just ask, what's been the damage to military bases thus far from Iran? I've seen, different reports of they've decimated our bases to Trump claiming we're winning the war and they've done nothing. I actually spoke to some military personnel over the weekend and said that's all fake news. You read that on CNN. The only thing that they damaged was the deaths that they got were on a bunch of people who were, it was a cheap shot by Iran basically on a bunch of military guys with storage units or something. So give us the actual details, at least as far as you know. What's been the damage thus far on military bases?
Yeah, so I mean, I talked to Daryl Cooper about this, and obviously he's not CNN, and he said that the damage he seemed to stay extensive, although I think there's a little bit of caveat in what he was explaining, which is there's not really targets left at these military bases for Iran to hit once they've hit some of the long range radar station there. A lot of that was moved out of the Middle East, and so I guess if Iran wanted to, they could put holes in runways, they could blow up hangars, they could destroy staff buildings, but there's nobody inside there, and it's not really an operational military base right now. I think Daryl's point that he was making on Provoked was essentially there's not a whole lot of targets left at these immediate military bases to hit. So maybe to say that they were destroyed isn't exactly the most accurate, although there has definitely been some damage done. I think fuel tanks and things like that, those bases. So they have been hit, but there's not a whole lot of targets there worth hitting. And so it's not like, if you looked at an image of it, a U.S. military base doesn't look like Gaza, but there's nothing there for the Iranians to hit right now, and everything of value has been hit.
All right, so before I ask this next question, I want to just make it clear in case anyone has a different takeaway with what I'm about to say next. I think that this was an epic blunder by Donald Trump. I don't think we needed to do this. And I think it was put a lot of risk on our plate. With all that said, I'm still hoping for the best. I want the deep state to learn its lesson that we can't support Israel and we can't have these wars. But I'd like to do it, maybe with the Thomas Massey and the voting public, and not with the end of our empire. So I just want to make it clear before I make this next point. I'm not rooting against our military, and I'm not rooting against Donald Trump. But I would love to, in an ideal world, I'd love for Donald Trump just to declare victory and that we can move on. But the pathway to victory I'm seeing for Iran here is that if they can keep this war going for longer, I think when gas prices really start going up in America, that's when you're going to see outrage. And I think where Donald Trump really might have weakened our empire is that, our deal with all these countries out in the Middle East was essentially you're selling your oil in dollars, you're going to buy our treasuries, you're going to invest in the U.S., and you're going to buy our military gear, and in response, we're going to protect you. And now these people are just trying to run a good old-fashioned oil business that's run by dictatorships. But they're running an oil company. It might be an evil oil company, but they're running an oil company, and this really sucks for their business. And now they're turning around, I think, and going, hey, we're canceling contracts. And I think that all of these countries are going to be looking to get out of the United States business because this is not keeping them safe and it's not keeping their business stable. I don't think they like what's happening here. On top of that, it almost feels to me like we're in World War III because, the same as we were working with Ukraine to basically be at war with Russia without being at war with Russia, you've got China supposedly, and also Russia is basically giving targets over to the Iranians so that they can hit stuff. So it seems to me the regime just needs to survive and make this so expensive that Israel and Donald Trump walk back. And then at that case, I think we're in a fantastically weaker position because we showcased we can't just always kick ass and that there aren't repercussions for what happened. So which brings me to my next point, which is how this war is actually being fought, and what I see as a major strategic blunder of that the United States of America, firstly on their first strikes, they killed civilians. So, that doesn't help for claiming the moral high ground or not targeting civilians. But then over the last couple of days, it's reported that they hit out a desalination plant. I think I said that word right. And then they just popped an oil field in Iran. And now, if Iran wants to create the most amount of havoc in the region and piss off our allies as much as possible, if they start targeting oil fields in other countries and taking out the desalination plants that, these countries are now scrambling for water and critical infrastructure is completely out the window, that seems like the worst case scenario for the United States of America, where all of the other countries, such as maybe Saudi Arabia, the UAE, just all of these countries are like, what the fuck did you just do, Trump?
Yeah. So this is crazy to me that the U.S. would have taken this step first, because Iran does, get most of their water through other means. They're not pulling seawater, taking the salt out of it and turning it into drinking water. But a lot of our Arab allies, and particularly Israel, do rely on a lot of it. Now, Iran may hesitate to just start hitting the UAEs and Qatars and Saudi Arabia's, water treatment facilities and oil wells and things like that, because those countries do have militaries and they're not currently using them to attack Iran, even though Iran is hitting targets in their cities. Certainly debris, at least from the Iranian drones, are killing civilians in those cities. And so there's a very delicate balance going on between Iran and the Gulf states right now that Tehran probably doesn't want to upend. And also, I think from the Iranian perspective, when you look at what could happen in the Middle East if this goes sideways for the United States, and if the U.S. is maybe forced to pull out some of its bases, these are a lot of monarchies and other types of just authoritarian rulers in the Middle East who are largely propped up by the American military presence in their country. And if the American Fifth Fleet was no longer in Bahrain, who says that the Shia majority of that country doesn't rise up and overthrow the Sunni monarchy? And certainly things like that could play out in Iran and other countries. And the point being, if you start bombing the water treatment facilities in Saudi Arabia, the people who are going to be thirsty are going to be the Shia, not the Sunni rulers and the royal family. And so at least that has to be something to consider from the Iranian perspective, is that they would be hurting the very people in the Middle East who are probably most loyal to them and would see them as some sort of liberators. I think that changes in Israel. I think Iran will probably start to target more Israeli civilian infrastructure and crucial civilian infrastructure, like the water treatment facilities, maybe sewage plants, power plants, oil refineries, oil taints, and all kinds of stuff like they're doing in Iran.
And thus far, what has Iran mostly been trying to target? Has it been mostly military targets, or have they been going after civilians?
I don't know if Iran is ever directly target. Like, I don't know if Iran has fired a missile with the programmed GPS coordinates being a hospital or a school. Certainly civilian targets, residential buildings have been hit in Israel, in the Gulf countries. Like I said, hotels in the Gulf countries. Now, Iran is arguing that these are in some ways military targets, either because military personnel is in there. Maybe there's an Iron Dome system on the street outside the residential building. And both governments have really locked down on the amount of footage getting out, actually showing, because during the 12-day war, I don't know if you remember, Robbie, there was video everywhere, very good cell phone camera video where you could see from 4 different angles an Iranian missile coming in and either getting intercepted by an Israeli interceptor, or it barely gets through and hits its target, right? This time there's definitely not as much of that content, even though I think there's just as much rocket and missile fire going on. And that's because both governments have really restricted that, because the information is so valuable to either side on programming their targets and missiles and understanding the capability of missiles and interceptors. So I just have no idea to evaluate that aspect, but Iran is claiming they're targeting military targets. I think that's probably generally true. I'm not sure if there's been times where they fired indiscriminately. And of course, whenever you're talking about missiles and drones being fired, not only are there interceptors, but there's other forms of electronic warfare as well, particularly when it comes to a drone. If a drone is supposed to have a certain course and it gets disabled, it's just going to fly in the direction that it's going a lot of times until it crashes into something. And so, certainly civilian targets have been hit and civilians have been killed by Iran.
And now, in the targeting of the other Arab countries, at first I found that shocking. It made no sense. I was like, why aren't they just going after military targets of the U.S. and of Israel? I've heard reporting that it's because the regime was fractured and they didn't have full control over, I guess, who was firing stuff. and so that you just had, people who were firing at, I guess, at targets that if the regime was still in, yeah.
I think what probably happened there is Iran set up a system that was basically like, if like a dead man switch, right? Like if the chain of command breaks, you have like these options, and so you're ordered to fire. And my guess is that certain commanders either misread orders, misunderstood the information coming in, and were probably firing at targets that Tehran, if this commands are given from central command, wouldn't have ordered them to fire, but at the same time they were acting upon order. So it's not like one general was going rogue and ordering his people to do something. I think everybody was probably acting on their orders the way they interpreted them.
Well, now, after what I've read in the last day, the strategy kind of makes sense, because at first I was thinking, why would you want to pick a fight with more countries? But now I understand basically getting the partners to, or the other oil partners of the United States of America, to cast the blame on Israel and America and be like, why did you have to create this mess for all of us, which potentially makes the war more costly to the United States of America by engaging in it. So like I do somewhat understand that strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think there's some other aspects of it as well, like the Iran is firing missiles and drones, and even if it's at American military targets or hotels in Qatar that are housing American military forces, and so Iran would say those are legitimate targets. And if you interpret it that way, Qatar is spending their interceptors to try to shoot that down, and they're running out of interceptors, and so now they're going to the Americans asking for more, and the U.S. is giving them to Israel. And so I think from the Iranian perspective, you're showing the Arab states exactly where they fit in the hierarchy of the U.S. empire, and that actually America isn't such a good or reliable ally. And also, it is forcing Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE to go to Washington and say, hey, end this war. This is killing our country. This is bleeding us dry. We cannot go on like this. And they do have leverage, not only over Washington and the amount of money that they invest in the U.S. And hell, I mean, maybe even I believe that it would be better if, the Qataris and the Saudis didn't have all this ownership and influence over U.S. companies. But from the perspective of Washington is a good thing. So they have leverage there, but they also have personal leverage over Donald Trump and his family, because all these kingdom sovereign wealth funds have invested and done business with Trump and with Kushner and with Wickoff and other people who are in the inner circle.
Now, it seems to me like our military is royally messing up, in that in this new generation of warfare, you need cheap drones. Otherwise, you're at risk for cheap drones taking out your incredibly expensive stuff and bleeding you dry. And from what I'm hearing, we're in this environment now where we're starting to